Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce my daughter, the greatest squandered inheritance of DNA you'll ever see." That was the opening line my father chose, smiling into a microphone like he was doing stand-up instead of a toast. He lifted a crystal glass and aimed it at me the way someone points a spotlight at a mistake. The wine inside was expensive enough to have a resume. His grin was polished, predatory, practiced. "She spends her days knee-deep in filth," he continued, voice syrupy with contempt. "Babysitting societies refuse instead of doing what she was born to do, which is carry my name forward. Tragic, really." The ballroom exploded with laughter. Not because it was funny, but because it was easier to laugh than to admit they'd just witnessed a father taking a knife to his own child in public. 300 people laughed to stay safe. 300 people laughed to stay included. They didn't know I had a wireless mic taped inside my sleeve, the kind that fits under a cuff and turns every word in a room into evidence. They also didn't know my father had spent months building a stage for his ego and had accidentally built a courtroom. Before I tell you how I turned his $25 million gala into a federal disaster in under a minute, tell me this. Has your own family ever tried to make you small in front of strangers? If you've lived that kind of humiliation, say something in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who learned to smile while bleeding. I stepped out from the edge of the room where the light didn't reach. My heels snapped against the marble as I moved, each step cutting through the laughter like a metronome counting down. The sound changed the atmosphere. People stopped mid-breath. The kind of silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was cautious, like the room sensed a storm shift. I walked straight to the staircase and up toward the stage. My father saw me coming. His eyes narrowed, already preparing the expression he used when he expected me to crumble. He was waiting for the old version of me, the girl trained to apologize for existing. The daughter he'd shaped with sarcasm and withholding and the constant threat of being discarded. He didn't get her tonight. I reached the stage, extended my hand, and took the microphone from him. Not yanked, not begged, just took it as if it had always belonged to me. For a second, he didn't move. His brain couldn't find the script for what was happening. The great Dr. Marcus, adored by donors and praised by magazine covers, stood there blinking like a man whose house had shifted 6 inches off its foundation. I turned toward the crowd. 300 faces looked up at me, still wearing their laughter like masks. They were waiting for my punchline. They thought this was part of the performance. They thought I was about to play along. "My father is correct about one thing," I said, and my voice didn't shake. It was calm in the way ice is calm. "I do work with the state's most vulnerable populations, but he forgot to mention my position." I let that hang, let it sink into the space. I watched shoulders tighten. I watched smiles fade. "I'm the senior program officer for the State Health Fund," I continued. "And I am the only person authorized to approve or deny the $25 million grant Dr. Marcus has been chasing since January." The ballroom didn't go quiet. It locked up. You could feel the oxygen disappear, like someone had sealed the room. My father's face changed color in real time. The arrogance drained out of him and left something pale underneath. His hand twitched. The glass slipped. It hit the stage and shattered wine spreading across the polished floorboards like a fresh injury. I didn't even glance down. I opened the slim black folder tucked under my arm. "Since we're all here," I said, flipping it open, "let's discuss the proposal you've been selling tonight. The Center for Dignity Recovery. Beautiful name, noble words, very marketable." I turned a page with deliberate slowness. "I reviewed your budget line by line this morning." I looked directly at the donors in the front row, the ones with soft hands and hard opinions, the ones who wrote checks for attention. 80% of the budget is for renovations," I said. "Imported Italian leather office furniture for executives, custom marble flooring for a private lobby, designer lighting for the board's suite." I paused, then added the part that mattered. "There is not 1 cent allocated for patient beds." A low sound rippled through the room, not quite a gasp, more like a collective realization. I flipped another page. The paper crack sounded loud enough to be a gunshot in that silence. Administrative transport, I read. $300,000, 2 luxury SUVs, for a nonprofit that claims it serves the homeless. I lifted my eyes to my father. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hands gripped the edge of the podium as if he needed something solid to keep him upright. "This isn't health care," I said into the microphone. "It's a pension plan dressed up as compassion." I closed the folder with a clean, final snap. "Dr. Marcus," I said, loud enough for every witness to hear, "your application is denied due to financial mismanagement and suspected fraud. You will not receive state funding. Not now, not later, not as long as I have authority." Then I let the microphone fall. It hit the stage with a heavy thump that echoed through the speakers and bounced back at them like a verdict. I turned and walked off without looking back. I didn't need to see his face to know what it looked like. I could feel the room staring holes into my spine. For most of my life, I'd been a shadow in my own family, the disappointment, the joke, the what happened to her story told at dinners. But that night, under lights purchased with money he never truly earned, I was the only thing anyone could focus on. 10 years earlier, my father had stood in the mahogany library of his estate, holding my acceptance letter to the top social work program in the state. I had been hopeful then, young enough to believe approval was possible if I tried hard enough. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't even pretend. He walked to the fireplace, crumpled the letter in one fist, and tossed it onto the logs as if it were trash. "You want to be a janitor for human misery?" he asked, brushing ash from his hands like he'd done something reasonable. "Fine, but don't expect me to pay for it. The moment you walk out that door, you're dead to me." He thought burning that paper would burn my future with it. He thought silence would erase me. He was wrong. Fire doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it forges. While he expanded his empire of cosmetic surgeries and vanity projects, I worked whatever hours I could get. I took night classes. I ate instant noodles and lived off stubbornness. I earned a master in public administration. The kind of degree you don't brag about at galas, but the kind that teaches you how systems actually move. I climbed from frontline casework to management, from management to oversight, from oversight to the state board. He never noticed. He never asked. In his mind, I remained frozen as the girl he discarded. That blind certainty was the crack he never saw coming. Because 6 months ago, his grant application landed in my inbox. His name sat on the header like it owned the document. I recognized the patterns immediately. Inflated projections, vague descriptions, contractors that looked suspiciously familiar. Shell companies disguised as vendors. The same greed wearing a different suit. I could have rejected it quietly. I could have sent a formal email with polite language and a neat denial and moved on. It would have been clean, efficient, professional. It also would have allowed him to survive. He would have spun the rejection into a story about bureaucracy. He would have blamed politics. He would have leaned on donors and charm and prestige to find a new pipeline. He would have stayed in control of the narrative, which was the only thing he ever truly cared about. I didn't want a denial. I wanted exposure. So I waited. I let the application progress through early stages. I allowed the preliminary approvals. I let him mistake process for victory. I watched him secure the ballroom and the catering and the wine. I watched him send invitations to judges and council members and board chairs, all the people he needed as witnesses to his greatness. He thought he was collecting supporters. He was collecting evidence. He built his own stage. He gathered his own audience. He created the perfect setting for his downfall and paid for it himself. He wanted a spectacle. I gave him one. And as I walked off the stage, I leaned in just close enough to him to speak without the crowd hearing. "I hope the lobster was worth it," I whispered. The silence behind me wasn't heavy anymore. It was charged. The air no longer smelled like his cologne and entitlement. It smelled like something cold and clean. Justice. I pushed through the service doors and into the staff corridor. Fluorescent lights. Concrete walls, the sharp bite of industrial cleaner in the air. The glamour of the ballroom died instantly out there, replaced by the plain truth of back hallways and function and people who actually worked. I didn't run, I didn't rush. I walk the way you walk after finishing something you've replayed in your head for years. Measured, steady, done. I wanted my car. I wanted quiet. I wanted the end of that chapter. But monsters don't always retreat when you take away their food. Sometimes they panic. Sometimes they lash out. The service door slammed behind me like a weapon. Not a gentle close, an impact. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Rage has a sound. So does desperate breathing. Stop right there. His voice hit the corridor bare and ugly without the ballroom's polish. No charm, no audience manners, just venom. I stopped and turned slowly. Dr. Marcus was about 10 feet away, tuxedo wrinkled, hair slightly out of place, face slick with sweat. He looked less like a celebrated surgeon and more like a man backed into a corner, trying to bite his way out. "You think you can walk away?" he snarled, rushing forward. He closed the distance and grabbed my wrist, hard enough that I felt the bruise forming under his fingers. "You think you can come into my world and do that to me?" I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then back into his eyes. I didn't flinch. "Let go," I said. He leaned in, breath thick with expensive wine gone sour. "Or what? You'll write a report. You'll rat me out to your little office friends. You ungrateful, disloyal brat. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me, by ruining me." There it was, the raw truth he always hid behind jokes and speeches. It never mattered to him that I chose social work. It never mattered that I didn't chase his version of prestige. Those were just excuses he used to justify the cruelty. What mattered was control. Hierarchy. In his mind, he was meant to orbit at the center of everything. And I was meant to revolve around him, reflecting his light, never generating my own. But tonight, I had stepped into a position where I could eclipse him. And he couldn't survive the idea that the person he'd treated as disposable was now the one holding power over his future. "You keep saying I ruined you," I said quietly. "I didn't ruin you. I showed everyone what you built. If the truth humiliates you, that's on you." His grip tightened. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I know? I can make one call and erase you. You'll never work in this state again. I'll bury you in lawsuits until you're begging on the sidewalk with the people you pretend to care about." He wasn't negotiating. He was reciting threats like prayers, hoping the old magic would return. Hopping intimidation could restore the world to its proper shape, the shape where he was untouchable and I was afraid. I yanked my wrist free with a sharp twist. He stumbled back, startled not by my words, but by the fact that my body no longer responded like prey. "You're still misunderstanding," I said, stepping closer until he felt the wall behind him. "You think this was a public embarrassment. You think that's where I stopped." His eyes flicked around the corridor, searching for someone to witness his authority. There was no one, just concrete and bright lights and the sound of his breathing. "You have no idea what you've started," he hissed. "But I have leverage. I still have something you care about." A cold heaviness settled in my gut, not fear exactly, but the recognition of how low he was willing to go. He pulled out his phone and held it up like a weapon. "You want to play hero," he said, and his mouth twisted into something cruel. "Let's see how heroic you feel when your grandmother is sleeping on a bench tonight." He let that hang, savoring it. He believed he'd found the one soft spot that would make me fold. Then he softened his voice into that faux intimate tone narcissists use when they think they're being clever. "You have your little title," he whispered. "Your little badge, your little paperwork power. But I have real power, money, resources. The kind your bureaucrat friends can't touch. I have reserves you don't even know about." He glanced back toward the ballroom, as if the chandeliers were proof of his supremacy. "I can write off a party like this," he continued, almost bragging now, desperate to feel important again. "Donor cultivation, research trips. I live in a world where rules are optional and money is the only law." He grabbed a half-empty bottle from a service cart, poured himself a splash like he needed it to keep his spine from collapsing, and swirled it with trembling bravado. $2,000 a bottle, he said. Look at what I can do. You can't touch me. I am the institution. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. 3 taps. I turned the screen toward him. It wasn't a video. It was a photograph, crisp and unmistakable. The catering invoice, the wine order, and consulting payments rooted to a company registered under his name, clean enough to pass a glance, dirty enough to bury him under scrutiny. You're right, I said, my voice calm. You are the institution, which means when you commit fraud, it isn't just bad behavior. It's a federal case. His face twitched. Confusion tried to shield him for a second. What are you talking about? It's standard, self-dealing. Everyone does it. Yes, I said, self-dealing, and it's illegal. I swiped to the next screen, a captured statute. IRS Code 4941. Private foundation assets cannot be used for personal benefit, not for luxury dinners, not for vintage wine, not for vanity parties labeled as cultivation. His hand shook. The glass hovered near his mouth and stalled midair. And you just did more than spend the money, I continued. You bragged about it, you admitted it, out loud, in front of me, after I already documented the invoices. The color dropped out of his face, so fast it looked like his body forgot how to hold blood. And when you combine that with the inflated contracts and shell vendors in your grant proposal, I said, you're not looking at a slap on the wrist. You're looking at serious charges. His lips parted. You wouldn't. I already did, I said. This stopped being a party the moment you opened your mouth. Now it's evidence. He stared at my phone like it was a gun. The confident man from the ballroom evaporated. What remained was fear wearing the tattered edges of pride. You traitor, he breathed. No, I said. You committed the crime, I just stopped covering for you. Panic turned him sharp again. He snatched his own phone and hovered over a contact like it was a detonator. Delete it, he snapped. Or I stop paying for your grandmother's care. Tonight, they'll wheel her out, I'll make sure of it. He shoved the screen toward me. The name of the facility glowed like a threat. I stared at it unimpressed. Call them, I said. Put it on speaker. His eyes narrowed. He dialed anyway, convinced that fear was inevitable. The line didn't even ring, disconnected. His expression cracked. She isn't there, I said. I moved her last Tuesday, a different facility, 1 year paid up front. His mouth opened, then closed. The story he'd kept alive about me being helpless, broke, dependent on him, collapsed in a single breath. You never paid attention, I told him. You were too busy worshiping yourself. I got my degrees. I ran budgets larger than your hospital's annual project list. I saved. I planned. I built a life you never bothered to look at because it didn't serve your ego. He slid down the wall, like his legs had given up on him. Please, he whispered. I can fix this. I have money hidden. I tilted my phone slightly so he could see the screen. An active call. Call in progress. Special Agent Miller, IRS Criminal Investigation. He blinked at it, not understanding at first. Then understanding landed like a hammer. He's been listening, I said, for the last 3 minutes. The phone slipped from my father's hand and hit the floor. The sound was small, pathetic. The kind of sound a crown makes when it finally falls. Footsteps thundered at the far end of the corridor. Voices, quick, controlled, official. I didn't stay to watch them surround him. I walked out through the service exit and into the night air. Outside, the sky smelled like rain and the city felt suddenly larger, like there was room to breathe again. I got into my modest car, hands steady on the wheel, and called my grandmother. It's finished, I said. A pause, then her voice quiet and careful. And him. He can't reach us anymore, I told her. For the first time I could remember, the noise in my head was gone. Not happiness, not exactly. More like the sore relief after something poisonous is finally removed. Like the body doesn't celebrate, it just exhales. I drove away without looking back. People like him convince themselves that power makes them untouchable. They confuse applause with immunity. They mistake fear for respect. But truth has a weight. It always comes down eventually. If someone is treating you like you don't exist, let them. Being ignored teaches you how to move quietly. It teaches you how to watch, how to learn, how to prepare. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts notice everything. And by the time they finally turn around and realize you're still there, the trap is already set, the ending already written. Sometimes the greatest advantage is being underestimated.